you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This is another of our popular Listener's Choice interviews, which we're playing over the weekend. We've chosen the most popular interviews for you to select the Listener's Choice winner. If you're not sure how the Listener's Choice competition works, have a look at horsechats.com/choice for the rules and the leaderboard. Today's chat's been brought to you by International Horse College. International Horse College's motto is people safety and horse welfare, and you'll find this message throughout our chats. Registered Training Organisation number 31352. Today's chat is Brendan Bergin. Brendan has been with us before. He's come all the way from Ireland, and if you'd like to just go to horsechats.com, search for Brendan, search for Bergin, or just go horsechats.com/Brendan Bergin. You'll hear his previous chat, and I'm sure you'll get to know him there. And today he's going to talk about 10 ways to develop control of speed over fences. How are you today, Brendan?
Yeah, pretty good.
Good. Now, Brendan, I always ask people, why did you come up with this particular subject? What inspired you? Did you see that there was a need there to develop control of speed over fences?
I suppose there's two things that brought me to it. Number one is I've got two clients at the moment have horses that are having problems with, I suppose, rushing, or just that they can't get the horse to come to the right spot in the fence. And I started thinking about what I say to them and why I say it to them.
Yep.
And the other thing is, I think there's a big misconception out there about the elements needed to get horses over fences. Like the old thing was, if in doubt, kick on.
Yes.
But I often think you're better off to say, if in doubt, maybe wait and see what happens. Because horses are really good at figuring out stuff, because through their evolution, figuring out stuff kept you alive.
Yep.
Whereas if you didn't figure it out, you were dinner. I suppose that's what I think. And I've got a set of parameters that I use that help to control those things.
Okay. So do you want to talk about the parameters?
Yeah. I suppose I use a set of 10 things that come from William Micklem.
Yep.
They're called the constants and the variables. And I found it a really good framework for training horses over and above the traditional German training scale, which I find somewhat limited. So his constants there's 5 of them. So the first is acceptance. And he subs in acceptance instead of submission, because he thinks that the horse has to have mental acceptance of the rider's aids, which lead to trust and partnership.
Yes.
The next one on that is calmness. So the horse being free from mental tension, which allows them to, if you suppose, hear clearly what we're saying. Forwardness, which is the horse taking you somewhere, that you're not carrying the horse around, which is obviously key coming down to a fence, no matter what size it is. Yes. Straightness, which is, I think, a term that's bandied around a lot, but without actually explaining what it means. To me, I think of it like a 2-wheel bike. The back wheels have to be following the front wheels. Otherwise, you've got problems with propulsion. So if you think of yourself on your bike, if your front wheel is turning and you want to be going straight, you're in trouble.
Yep.
And then the last one on the constants is purity, which is the correct, natural, regular sequence of footfalls. So in dressage, one of the things that I suppose you see a lot of is that the walks get broken because people are so obsessed with getting the horse into a specified posture that they lose that natural gait. And in show jumping, there's a lot of, I suppose, neck manipulation that happens, which causes the horse to push their weight downhill rather than sitting on their hocks. So the idea of the constants is that they're there all the time, and we're blending them all the time.
Yep.
Then the next sort of set of parameters is the variables, which are things that we put in and out in varying degrees at all times. So first is direction, which is obviously where are we going? So knowing your precise route, having a plan. Next is speed, which is how fast are we going? So going slower, going faster. Next is impulsion, which is available energy. It sometimes is defined as energy from the back end, but I think of it as energy that's available. So a horse that is like a bouncing ball is really hard to ride, and equally a horse that won't move is really hard to ride because the energy is not there.
Yep.
Balance is next, which is the distribution of weight, and I always think of that as dynamic equilibrium. So obviously just in front of the fence, we need the horse to load the front legs completely so the hind legs can jump through and push off the ground.
Yes.
So you have to allow them to lift their head enough that they can push into those front legs and then jump through the hind legs and push over the fence. And then the final thing is, I suppose, is a hark back to Andrew McLean's. It's timing and the correct use of transitions and releasing pressure at the right moment. And what's interesting about that one is I watched Angelo Telleton at ISIS, with him at ISIS in Canada, and he's talking about the incorrect release of pressure coming up to fences, that when horses stop, we always release the rein. And it was just really interesting to hear his thoughts on how we need to train show jumpers.
Yes, yes.
So that's sort of the 10 parameters that I'm using when I'm looking at horses.
What did Andrew actually say? Did he say, sorry, not Andrew, Angelo Telleton, did he say about release of pressure? I mean, I know you said not to, but...
What he did was, he said it's really hard, like if a horse, say, stops, to do, like, because we're trying to survive, so we're trying to stay on. So
yes.
What he said to do is to set up exercises that stretch the moment of approach. So he uses sort of like canter poles coming in. So the jump, in a sense, starts at the first canter pole.
Okay.
So if you hit that first canter pole right, you're never going to have a problem with the jump. So it's about getting the horse thinking about going forward over the jump, that we're not poking and prodding at them at the last moment. Because that happens a lot. You'll stand there at a show jump ring and watch people, and they're hawking at the horse as they come to the fence, or they're booting the horse forward. When at that point, in my opinion, the job should be done. You should be just sitting there and enjoying the ride at that point.
Yep. Okay. No, he's got some great insights. He's been a guest on our show, and everything he said was just brilliant. So
yeah, I've been in contact with him. I've been starting. You're probably familiar with his rope ring.
Yes.
I've been started some of my young stock with the rope ring, and just it's really interesting to. It was actually after listening to the Horse Chats interview to evaluate the training and make sure that our training is good. And my trained horse goes really well in the rope ring. And the young stock, it's about stitching it together really well. And it's so interesting, and it's changed the way I look at how I use the bridle.
Yes, I think his training method is going to open some eyes, just the whole getting the horse going around a show jumping course without the bridle, and the steps towards it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get on to our chat, which is 10 ways to develop control of speed over fences. And the first one you've got is unbalanced horses rush.
Yeah. So what I always think of when I see horses that are coming in too fast into a fence, I think of them like motorbikes. If you imagine you were trying to jump a motorbike over a fence, even if you had a ramp in place, you've got really limited options. If they're taking over and towing you in there, you've got nothing that you can do. It's all coming out of momentum instead of out of balance. So if I kind of just jump back towards the constants and variables, they need development in the forwardness, the straightness, the purity, the balance, and the impulsion.
Yes.
So you've got to make sure all of those things are under stimulus control so that you can make sure that you can come into the fence at the right rate. And the other person I actually want to quote here is Conor McGregor, who you may or may not be familiar with. He's an MMA fighter.
Okay.
And what he says is that precision beats strength every time. And I think that about getting horses to come into fences at the right rate, if they come in at the right rate, they've got very little to do.
Yep.
As do we.
Yep.
So I suppose it's one of the biggest things I see is riders rushing horses or horses learning to rush from being rushed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I had to write down that precision beats strength. Get some key points.
Yeah. Oh no, it's. I think he's the most obnoxious person, but some of what he says makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Okay. All right. Now the next point you've got is horses need to move evenly forward into each rein.
Yeah. Okay. So I think of when you jump a show jump course.
Yep.
You've got to turn right and you've got to turn left, and if the horse likes turning right and doesn't like turning left, or you haven't developed that in them, it means that instead of having a front door and a back door to a fence, you've got windows on either side. And you want to always think that the horse is going in the front door of the house and going out the back door of the house, so they're going over the fence.
Yep.
And feeling the straightness has to be a huge priority. And I think of it in two ways. I go, you've got to feel the shoulders, and the way to do that is with your two thighs and your two hands. So if you feel them even in the contact and even in your thighs, you know they're going to come straight and through and over. And it's all about developing your straightness, your purity, your balance, and your impulsion. And you've got to make sure that that's even.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And it's one of those things that it comes down to the flat work. Like my mare, for example, loves to turn right, but we're always working to develop the left turn, because she'd rather drop that shoulder and fall round than keep it up and come around. Whereas when you turn right, she just turns perfectly right, always, and always has since day one.
Yep. Okay, the next thing you've got is about quality transitions. Smoothly trained trot to halt, walk canter, trot to canter.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the time when we start to go in and start jumping, we forget about the fact that this is dressage with obstacles.
Yep.
So you've got to make sure that as soon as you sit back and tell the horse, come back to me, they should slide back to you. It shouldn't be a case of you having to extract their back molars to get them to come back to you. So if you train them smoothly through clarity, like every time I get on every horse, I do halt step backs until I feel they're with me. Then I trot on, I do some trot to halts, and again, make sure they're with me. A few canter to halts, make sure they're with me. And then I just keep moving up and down the gears, because if you don't have that gearing, you don't have the acceptance of the horse. And it means that you're always on the back foot trying to keep the wheels on the wagon instead of sort of letting the horse look after the wheels being on the wagon. You pushing the controls. Yep.
All right, now we're talking about now rider problems. We've got first up overriding or pushing too much.
Yeah. I think that is probably the biggest problem at a novice level.
Okay.
Is that the rider's coming down to the fence and they haven't seen the stride. Like there's lots of people say you shouldn't see the stride or whatever, but you've got to feel like you're coming down to a stride, or they're not looking at the fence early enough, and they can feel that it's wrong. And instead of sort of letting the horse sort it out, getting involved, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing. And one of those riders I was talking about that I'm teaching at the moment, who has a horse that has a problem with rushing, one of the biggest problems they have is that if she feels she's off the stride, she'll push her and push her and push her and push her. And that loads the shoulder, and then the horse stops.
Yep.
Whereas if you apply the same circumstance and she just sits there, the horse will nearly always jump.
Okay.
Even if she's on the wrong stride.
Yep.
And I think that it's the last minute getting in there and doing it. Like the last 3 strides, you should have all your work done.
Okay.
If you're doing something in those last 3 strides, it's too late. And it's about coming back and developing your forwardness, developing the speed and developing the impulsion, so the horse can come smoothly and fluently down to the fence without having to make a last minute change. Because again, if you think of, I always think back to horses being prey. When you sort of start making them move erratically, I think you fire up that prey sense in their brain. and you develop a fear coming down to the fence.
Yep. What about the riders that overhold?
Yeah. You see it, I think this is more, you move into sort of the more advanced rider, if you like, market on this. And it seems to be the big thing, and it's the thing that's talked about is, checking.
Yep.
You got to check them. And yeah, you've got to make sure you sit the balance back onto the back legs to make sure that they're going to be able to push up, especially if you're talking about jumping bigger fences. But again, if you're having to aggressively check them, it means again that you're disrupting that rhythm, that forwardness, that speed and impulsion coming down to the fence. And it means that all that fluency that you've been training in your flat work is all just, you've wasted your time.
Okay.
And I think that you see it a lot with riders, again, who haven't looked at the fence. Like my trainer, John Mulvey, he's always saying to me that just look at the fence. If you look at the fence, your body will naturally modulate the speed if you just keep looking at it, because you're always automatically looking for the stride to prevent yourself getting dead.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? You're looking to try and see that stride coming down, especially once you get to a certain level. So I think overholding or, checking is a huge, huge problem.
Okay.
As you you go from your, 7 meters towards your meters, and particularly your teenage people, because they want to feel they're in control.
Yes, from one problem almost to another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's riding is the, I suppose, the art of moderation. When you go to either extreme, you have a problem. Whereas when you stay in that middle ground where you can tip one way or tip the other, in a much better position to have a reasonable conversation with the horse.
If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com.
Tell us about training the waiting stride then.
Yeah, I suppose one of the biggest issues I see is that riders having to sort of hold. And I think that the big thing is that the horse has to wait with you rather than you holding the horse. So one of the best examples of a person who does that is a guy called Michel Robert or Michael Roberts. He's a French show jumper, and he just has an amazing, I suppose, rapport with his horses where they wait with him. He sits tall and they come back, and he has a lovely just softness. And I think if you can train your horse to wait with you, so what I mean when I say that is that when you're cantering on the flat, that you can steady the horse back and then release the rein to give the horse space to stay in that stride. I think that's so important, that when you're coming down to a fence, you need to be able to just let the horse go and they just stay with you, and then you close the leg and then they pop up and over. And I think it's something that is hard to train, because when you're coming down to the fence, it's really tempting as a human to get involved. And I think if you can just train the horse to take over that role, that you say, this is the speed, and let them sit there, it's really good. And it comes sort of back to Andrew McLean's sort of training idea of cruise control. The horse should stay in the pace we put them in until we put them into another one.
All right. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But before that, the quality hind leg action.
Yeah. Well, what I've noticed over the years is that, like people, every horse has a dominant hind leg.
Yep.
And it's often manifested, if you jump back to the idea of even in each rein, to uneven rein contact. So if you find, say, your horse is always light in your right hand, it's possible that right hind leg isn't pushing up underneath. And I've started doing a few interesting things with tail bandages. So I have one client with a horse who has a very weak hind leg. So what we do is, in the warm-up, I put the tail bandage around that hind leg and up to the girth. Not tight, but there's plenty of elastic in it. And what it does is it gets that hind leg pushing underneath.
Okay.
And that horse was always landing disunited in the right canter after fences. And if I put on that tail bandage for like 5 minutes while we're just trotting and cantering in, the horse first off looks nearly lame, And then once they start using that hind leg, there's no problem with the horse becoming disunited. And again, I'm not saying to any of the listeners to go out and stick the tail bandage on. It's something that I've developed over quite a long time, is using tail bandages to do a job. But the point is that when that hind leg started working better with that horse, the horse stopped taking down the top rail and also started landing united. So it made it much easier for her to make the distances, whereas she would have previously had a problem.
Yes.
And this is that same horse that has the problem with stopping, that it comes careering down to the fences. And since we've started, activating that right hind leg, the rushing reduces and the quality of the jump is improved. So it comes back to that idea that unbalanced horses rush. So now that she's more balanced, she doesn't rush.
Now we can talk about the cruise control, because, we've had Andrew on the show a couple of times. So he's saying that you ask your horse to do whatever pace, whatever, and the horse just stays there. You don't have to keep nagging it and pushing it and everything else. And I think you're sort of carrying on with that idea here, aren't you?
Well, I have to admit, I believe on building on the shoulders of giants, because I have a huge amount of respect for what Andrew has to say, and Angelo Tellerton and all those sort of people. And I'm always trying to see how I can understand what they're saying better. So what I think of with cruise control is a little bit of a different spin on what Andrew says. I think that you have to develop your horse's consistent home stride pattern, which should be on a 12-foot canter. Okay. So your horse should naturally want to be in that 12-foot canter if you want to show jump successfully, because that's what all the distances are set on. Yep. And you need to be able to push them on from that stride pattern and bring them back a little bit from that stride pattern. But you want the horse to always be returning to that. And it gives you that development of a default, regular, forward-going stride. Whereas I think lots of the time you can see people shutting down their strides. I'm one of them. I have to always think of opening the stride. And then you've got other people who are overriding and pushing their stride too big. And it's about modulating that into being that moderate, keeping the horse in that 12-foot canter. Some horses have a natural 12-foot cruisy canter. Other horses have to stretch for it. So one of my horses has to stretch to make the 12-foot canter natural. And then I've got another horse who is a natural, probably 14-foot canter. So I'm always trying to bring that back a little bit. So I suppose that's my idea of cruise control, is to have a default canter.
Yep. Good. Now, you talked a little bit before about the horse coming in, you've done your job, but the next point you've got is allowing the horse to come to the fence unhindered. Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose the big thing, I was very taken one day when I was having a lesson with William Micklem, and he said to me that, remember that a still load is easier to carry than a wobbly moving load. And it was when I was sort of doing too much before the fence and doing too much over the fence. We were jumping one of my young horses over, probably about 70 centimetres. Yep. And I was folding like we were jumping the Grand Prix. And I was also, doing the whole checking thing coming in. And the last few strides, I think, you have to let the horse think. So you've got to be as still and with the horse as possible. But for those last 3 strides, if you've set that canter and got that default cruisy canter coming down, then the horse can look after it all. I'm not saying that you should come down to the fence and do nothing. But what I'm saying is that lots of the time we don't sort the canter out until we're on the final approach. And if you've sorted the canter well before the final approach, you just sit there. Okay. And then the horse comes down and will ping up over the fence. I suppose that's what I'm sort of getting at. And it's just about all the time developing the base units of movement, which are obviously your speed and your direction.
What about the last point you've got here, letting go?
I think once you've developed your speed and developed an ability to change direction without having to use aversive pressures, the horse can be in a way, alone in their own head, because we like to think ourselves as this team jumping, but in the end of the day, there's only one creature that actually jumps the fence, and that's the horse.
Yep.
So if we're in their ear nagging away at them, and not letting them jump naturally, then they can't really do it to their best quality. And I see that in my own teaching. If you set someone up and say, right, here's what I want you to go and do it, and we'll talk afterwards. I'd say about 95% of the time, the person will do it better than when you shout leg or turn or
okay.
them,
Yes.
And I think horses are the same. The more we can give them the framework to do what they need to do, the better they can do it.
Yep. No, I think that's good. I've made so many notes here, Brendan. I've just lots and lots. I know we'll go and check out the YouTube, the Michael Roberts, the French show jumper.
Yeah.
And much better to see an image, isn't it? If you can see someone
hear
doing,
someone.
the waiting stride. And I think the tail bandage on the weak legs, I'm sure our listeners aren't just going to race out and do it, not go to an experienced coach or an experienced person who would know how to do that and how to do it correctly. But I think, Brendan, if someone does want to talk to you about that exercise or about anything you've said, what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact me is by email, which is info@berginequine.com.
Yep.
And if you go to the website, berginequine.com, you'll find all the other ways to contact me. But email is the best, because ringing me is a problem because I'm usually in the middle of doing something. But if you email me, I'll call you back.
Okay.
And I just have one final thought before we finish up.
Sure.
When I teach a lot of kids, and I always say to them that there are 4 elements of good riding. Number one is look and plan. Number 2 is speed. Number 3 is direction. And number 4 is position or form. And what I always say to them is, without looking, there's no point in planning. And without planning, there's nothing to look at. So anytime you're going to jump, make sure that above everything else that you look at the jump you're going to do and have a plan for how you're going to do it. Because without that, you leave the fate of your jumping to chance.
Yep.
Rather than to training.
Okay. Good advice. All right, Brendan, again, so much information, so much to digest. I'm sure that people will come back and listen to this one a couple of times just to go back and get all the tips and all your information, just everything that you've said. It's been brilliant. So thank you, and we hope to get you on again sometime soon.
Thanks very much.
Okay, good to talk to you, Brendan. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Now, if you're still there, you probably know that I'm absolutely passionate about education within the horse industry. That's why I host this podcast. My other venture is Online Horse College. Have a look now at onlinehorsecollege.com, and I'll see you over there.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.